If you've watched our previous videos, you know the ELCA Churchwide Assembly will take place later this summer in Phoenix. You'll also remember that the focus of these videos addresses the erosion of congregational autonomy and congregational influence in the ELCA's governance and focus. This video further substantiates that point by looking at one of the proposed constitutional changes approved by the ELCA Church Council meeting last November. These changes will be up for vote at the Churchwide Assembly this summer. At first, this change may not seem very significant, as it has to do with who can vote at future churchwide assemblies. But as you'll hear, the impact of this amendment is certainly significant. The proposed constitutional amendment brings about a significant change in the makeup of voting members at the Assembly. It's intended to bring more voices to the Assembly that are not specifically delegates from congregations. Why does this matter? Well, it's pretty simple. Voting members hold a lot of power. Their voices and their votes determine which constitutional amendments are passed, and they can also propose floor amendments. Watch our video on the proposed change to ratifying constitutional amendments to get a better understanding of just how significant these floor amendments will be. Simply put, the voting members of the Churchwide Assembly have a significant impact on changes to the Constitution. Now, let's return to the proposed changes in the makeup of that voting body. The proposed amendment expands voting members to include not only people tied to a congregation, but also people representing what is known as Synod-authorized worshiping communities. These SOCs, as they're called, consist largely of community outreach and social justice-oriented groups. They're established by the Synod, and their ongoing existence is dependent on the Synod's approval. Simply put, they are not independent of the Synod's influence, as is a congregation. In other words, they do not function as congregations. While that may not sound like a big deal at first, the effect of this change will likely be significant. No longer will Assembly voting members be elected at a ratio of 1 voting member for every 50 congregations. Now it will be 1 voting member for every 50 congregations and Synod-authorized worshiping communities. That means the already limited voice of the congregations will be further diluted. Additionally, this proposed amendment allows synods to elect an additional young person as a voting member, an additional person of color, and an additional person of a historically underrepresented group. The proposed constitutional amendments define a historically underrepresented group as persons of color, diverse gender identities, diverse sexual orientation, lower income, and people who are not natural-born U.S. citizens, just for example. Keep in mind that we're talking about a shift from congregational orientation in the ELCA to an institutional mindset that shifts power away from congregations. This seemingly innocuous amendment clearly demonstrates this shift, as it would result in reducing the voice of the congregation to have influence on what happens at the national level. And, just so you know we're not reading something into this change that isn't there, the ELCA's own explanation of proposed constitutional amendments, dated January 27, 2025, states clearly that, quote, the addition of references throughout the Constitution to participants in Synod-authorized worshiping communities, SOCs, is intended to expand inclusion and leadership opportunities for participants in SOCs, end quote. Before we conclude this video, we want to be sure to paint a clear picture of the role of the voting delegates sent to the Churchwide Assembly. It would be understandable to mistake the ELCA's process as something in line with an equal representation model of governance. So let's set the record straight. Assembly voting members are elected or appointed at the Synod level. There are no requirements that those voting members represent their congregations, let alone their synods, views. In other words, the Assembly voting members are not beholden to the people who sent them to the Churchwide Assembly. They are, in fact, frequently encouraged to vote their own conscience, which may be a view or opinion that's independent of those who sent them to the Assembly. Therefore, even if the voting member belongs to a congregation, they're not there to represent their congregation. Thus, congregations as a whole have limited, if any, sway in what happens at the national level. What we've set forth in these videos is just the tip of the iceberg. There are a lot of complex details in these moving parts, That's why we've provided ELCA documents on our website, so you can do your own research and come to your own conclusions. And be aware, those who claim that these videos are a scare tactic are attempting to persuade you to not pay attention and to not educate yourself. In an upcoming video, we'll trace some of the additional misunderstandings and misrepresentations that have been propagated by ELCA leaders.